The Backdoor GAA Podcast for 2023 is now brought to you by Steede Motor Group. For your personalised vehicle shopping experience, visit steedemotorgroup.ie. We are now delighted to announce our second sponsor of the podcast. Harper Finlay are a professional service recruitment company operating nationwide and are dedicated to helping people find their dream job.
We're delighted now to be joined by former Galway senior footballer Eddie Hoare, and hopefully we'll have Irish Examiner journalist Maurice Brosnan in the next few minutes. We're looking ahead to Galway's final group game in the All-Ireland series against Armagh this weekend in Carrick-on-Shannon. Much debate about the venue, but Carrick-on-Shannon is where it takes place in the end. It really looks like Galway will have top spot, and they would have to lose by a superior score really to avoid not getting top spot on the seed. So Galway really look like to have top spot. Eddie, just to bring you in before we touch on the match, the league in Galway, it's obviously been taking a bit of preference. It has been run off really well, though, is one thing you'd have to say to the county board, to be at a league semi-final stage already in June.
Yeah, no, definitely. Obviously, there was a lot of calls for the split season. Personally, I agree with the split season. I think it's good for club players, and most of your players will be at club level. And ultimately, like I said, it is good for the clubs, and I think they'd recognise that. I do think, on the other hand, inter-county wise, they do need to probably look at tweaking it. It's a little bit drawn out insofar as there's not enough, I think, knockout games, or not enough, I suppose, relevance given to some of the games. So again, I think they can look at that and maybe tweak that side. But in terms, like I said, of a split season, I think it has worked very, very well from a club perspective. Like us as a club, from March on, you have a game every 2 weeks, right throughout the spring, and we'll also be getting an opportunity then, let's say, depending on Galway's progress, in July, August and September, to be playing championship football. So again, I think it bodes well going forward, and albeit there can be some tweaks here and there, I think it has worked very, very well to date.
You've had a relatively good league yourselves, Michaels, into the league semi-final, obviously this Friday now against Carfin.
Yeah, no, we'd all acknowledge that. I think it's been a good league campaign, top four in Division 1. We've maintained Division 1 status, I think, for over 10 years. So we're an established Division 1 side, playing Carfin on Friday night now at 8 o'clock out in Carfin. So it's a really, really good test of where we're at in terms of our preparation for championship. The championship draws are on next Monday night in Gaeltachta. So again, that's always a good. Any time the draw is made, it's a good reminder of getting the minds set and the bodies set for championship. But in terms of the league, we'd be very, very happy with the progress that we've made. We've integrated in a lot of young players, got more out of the young guys that were integrated in last year, and we still have some of the old timers like myself still knocking around. The legs mightn't be as good, but the heads are still not too bad. But no, we've a really, really good blend, a good mix, really good management structure in place. The guys have been there now for 3 years. There's a good continuity there, and I think it's reflective in our performances, our game plan, the style at which we play, and hopefully again another solid performance on Friday night, and it'll bode well for either a league final or indeed the championship in a few weeks to come.
Is there an eagerness after last year coming up short in the quarter-final to push things on this year?
Yeah, I think the lads, the management team would very be conscious of performance and just driving out the type of the style of game plan that they'd like. Yes, there would be a disappointment in the dressing room last year. We felt that we could have reached the semi-finals, and hopefully that can be bottled up, and I think it has in terms of a reflection of our league performance this year. There is an eagerness there. I think we'd have taken a lot from last year, that we're not too far away from the what you would have called the leading pack. I think we're top four in Division 1. I think we're there on merit. We had a very, very good league campaign. I think we only lost one game. The last game was a dead rubber. It wasn't relevant to the standings. So no, we have had a very, very good league campaign, and championship coming up. We're really looking forward to it, and there's a good excitement around the club. We've a lot of young players coming through. We've really good network within the club in terms of juvenile right throughout to senior, and I think it bodes well for the future for us as a club, and indeed then on for the likes of Páirc Joyce and Galway seniors. They'll get a lot from our club going forward, hopefully.
And we have Maurice Brosnan here as well. Maurice, we're just talking about the minute, really about how successful and how, I suppose, how good that the Galway club leagues have been ran this year, when you consider you're in league semi-finals already in the second weekend in June.
Yeah, it's been phenomenal. I think the league has really stood to. We're playing a league semi-final on Friday night. Like, just from I can speak from our own club's perspective, we got a huge amount of value out of it. The one thing I would say, Paul, just a small thing, I think if I was to make a slight adjustment, I think the concession of games, you've got a situation. You look at Salthill now, for example, like they're rival clubs of ours, so I wouldn't generally have much sympathy for Salthill, but there'll be 7 weeks out of the game for a league final, because that semi-final, according to the GAA website anyway, has been conceded. Aaron aren't going to field on Friday, and that is wrong. I don't think that should be tolerated, really. So I think concession of games like that, there's been a couple of, we're in Division 2, there's been a couple of games conceded in that division. A semi-final conceded is poor. So slight tweaks. I personally think there's nothing wrong with top two into a final, top two compete relegation and going that way. I don't think you necessarily need to go full bore and have these semi-finals and playoffs, when there's fine margins in these leagues. You could be fourth and you could be sixth, and it's the difference between competing for promotion and getting relegated. So I think there's be nothing wrong with one or two. That's a slight tweak, but generally, just speaking broadly, I think it's been a huge success. I think the club's getting massive value out of it. I have to say again, I give huge praise to the Galway management for letting us play league football. I'll go back to our first league game this year was away to carrick-on-shannon out there, and Sean Fitzgerald played phenomenally well that day, and I think he's really kicked on since. But the fact that those lads are let play pro football, I think, huge testaments to the Galway. So they're definitely, it's not perfect, I would say, but it is definitely a positive news story.
Yeah, I think it's a good point just on how you keep it. I think that is a good, valid point. I think the one up, one down, before you used to have maybe three going down, and there's a lot more to play for. For instance, our last game against Corofin was ultimately a dead rubber, because we're going to play them next Friday night anyways. That game was irrelevant. But to add to your point again on Páirc Joyce and the senior management team, like, they've brought in the likes of Sam O'Neill, they brought in Sean Fitzgerald earlier in the year. Like, that bodes quite well for, take for example ourselves on Friday night, the likes of your Conal Gallagher's, these types of guys, they'll be looking to impress on Friday night, because they feel that the door is always open for Páirc Joyce to maybe integrate them into the setup. So again, it makes for a much more competitive and a better league, and you get the most out of some of your better players. So again, I think that open door policy across the championship being introduced by Páirc, like Maurice has said, has definitely led to a more competitive and more interesting league standings.
And Maurice, probably biggest positive has been just that every second week playing these games.
Yeah, and I think, like, from a development perspective, I think players, like, as it doesn't need to be explained to anybody else, but players get so much value out of that, of having games every second week, of having. I think it's the fact that there's structure. To build on what Eddie said there, I think that's a great point. Like, I do think when you look at it from a broad perspective, the idea that it's a tangible goal that if I play well in club football, that management are paying attention to club football, there's a chance that I will kick on, is a huge plus. And we've seen that, like, sometimes I kind of laugh. It's very hard for media to report on the ongoings within Galway, A, because we don't know what's going on there, but B, because they might play an A versus a B game and invite somebody in. And then you can't technically report that he's part of the management, or part of the squad, because he's only coming in to make up the numbers. But at the same time, it's a huge plus for a young lad to be invited in to make up numbers in an A versus a B game. And the fact that I think a lot of that is rewarding form as well. There definitely seems to be an element of, if you go look at this big picture, Paul, from Don Dibley's workshops going on to the clubs, I just know from talking to West Galway clubs, as far out as Clifton, out in Clonbur, they've got huge value out of that. They're from a coach perspective, that has really built up trust with clubs. You talk about the development squads, I think that has been a major plus. I know it's not again, it's not perfect, and maybe you'd like a bit more interaction with that. But the fact that for a lot of lads, there seems to be a genuine pathway. There's guys who had very good club form last year, might be on the fringes. I look at some of the Sotil lads now, for example, who are in that development squad at the minute, who could, there's absolutely every chance some of those lads could kick on, but maybe that is it's a bridging point. And the fact that, so club football matters now, club football is relevant, we're paying attention to what's going on there, and we'll reward your form if you're playing well there. I think all that bodes well.
Definitely, yeah. And John Maher again is a really good example. Club form really good last year. I think John O'Mahony had spoken Pádraig Joyce, he respected his view, his opinion, and Galway football has been the beneficiary, and I'm sure there's other examples, but he's just one of the ones from last year in terms of club form. It is being looked at, which is important. In years gone by, sometimes inter-county setups might have been perceived as a closed shop. But Pádraig Joyce, I suppose, he gave so much to Killare, and he always valued club football. When he was even playing with Galway, he gave so much to his club right to the bitter end, and I think that's reflective in the style of management in terms of picking players on form and respecting the clubs. And going back to what we said, it's only good for club football in Galway, and the league format benefits.
And Paul, just on that point, that's a really good point, because if you look at, it's a testament to, like, so in fairness to Galway, they're doing something right with the clubs, but the clubs have to do something right as well, and they are. Like the John Maher one is a perfect example. For donkey's years, you look nationally, the talk was, if you're not in with in the mix in an inter-county setup, you won't be athletically ready for inter-county football. You need exposure to this level for a couple of years. And John Maher is effectively, he was there in 2020, fair enough, but he was no involvement in 2021 or 2022, and he's parachuted back in. And if anything, he looks like one of the most athletic players in the team right now. He's flying. Daniel O'Flaherty is another testament to that. A guy who, again, had a great club campaign last year, has dropped in, doesn't look out of place whatsoever. There's other lads who are knocking around the fringes of that development panel, the likes of Donald Hunt or Thomas' brother, the other Clannan. They're all, like that development will all have them in very good stead for next year. And that benefits, right? So that's a great thing for Galway football, but that's a benefit for club football too. Like club football is benefiting out of this relationship as well, that there's a general rising standard. We know the standards are good, because we're seeing the performances of when Mulcullen get out of Galway, for example, and they're well able to compete elsewhere. Some of the biggest tests Mulcullen got in Connacht were in Galway. That's just a fact. So I think from a Galway football perspective, we're in a good place, but it's a working in tandem. It's down to what's happening at the top and what's happening within clubs.
Yeah, and another point to probably like to touch on that benefits the whole thing is Galway are probably one of the top 2 or 3 teams, and maybe years gone by we would have slipped out of that and maybe been considered a top 8, top 10, and the interest mightn't have been resonated down. So like I know if I was still in my prime looking to knock on the door of an inter-county team, you'd want to be involved, and that led well to a development side. Before, we often seen that some players just didn't want to go in, whereas now they all seem to want to be there. They want to be involved because they know Galway, with a little bit of luck or ball breaking one way or the other, they're really in the conversation for the Sam Maguire. So again, it's reflective of the overall setup where we're at in terms of national honours. So it bodes well for Galway going forward, and hopefully a long summer ahead.
Sure, and just before we do touch on the Galway Leitrim, Maurice, the Miners were obviously playing at the weekend against Derry. I was down at it myself. It was just one of those days. They obviously lost out in the end to Derry, 113 to 4 points. Just felt it was one of those days where Hamilton went wrong down in carrick-on-shannon. Yeah,
and you get that variance a lot at 17s in particular. Paul, you go back to the All-Ireland win last year, like there was huge variances in. I did the kind of final that year. If you would ask me after that game, would I going to win an All-Ireland title? I couldn't have seen it coming, but that variance has happened. It probably happens on a particularly bad day. The other thing I'd say as well is you look at Derry and in particular Monaghan this year, I think, and there is definitely, they're very well-conditioned teams, like extremely well-conditioned teams. And at whatever about at senior level, when you're talking underage football, that is just such a huge gulf. Like that it really is that can be the deciding of games. Now on the flip side, I'm not always necessarily sure how, if you're athletically dominant a guy at 17, it's not guaranteed you're going to do the same thing when you get to 20, 21, 22. So I don't know, does it necessarily stand to other players as well? But yeah, this is just, you looked at last year, I thought Galway may look very good. From the very start this year, I thought Derry and Monaghan looked like very good minor teams. I actually I covered the Tyrone Antrim were playing in a minor game before Derry played Monaghan in the semi-final. Tyrone, I think they put 8-42 to 2 points up that day. that was a phenomenally strong Tyrone team, and this Monaghan bet then. So when you consider that was the level that was coming out of Ulster, I think it just happened that this year we had the same way it happened in Connacht last year. We had two very good teams coming out of Ulster. This was probably, I'm not going to say in the works, but it wouldn't be a huge surprise either that there was a small bit of growth there.
Yeah, for probably two significant blows throughout the year for Galway was losing Jack Inahan and Sean Walsh. Eddie, your own club and Alan Glynn involved with that team. Disappointing way to finish, but there's still plenty of players that you'll expect to see pushing on out to under 20s probably next year.
Yeah, Alan would always, in any of his post-match interviews, would always, his big take-home will be bringing players through. Last year was a phenomenal year for them, like going on in the All-Ireland against a really, really good Mayo team. Like, they couldn't have asked for more in terms of like what they brought. Winning that All-Ireland was like, leaves a massive mark. We just haven't won very little of them. 2007 was our last, I think 86 before that. So like, Alan has left a massive mark over the last 4 years, and I'm sure next year we'll integrate some of the guys that were 16s this year as well. But his philosophy would always be to instill good values in the team, to put them in a better shape for the likes of Pádraig Joyce to pick them up in a year or two's time, and he's certainly done that in spades. And always winning is a bonus, and last year, like I said, was a phenomenal year for them. Minor, like Maurice mentioned, is it can be fickle. Galway could have won last week and they could have gone on and won the All-Ireland. Like last year, I remember just an example, when we were minor in 2005, we won the Connacht, and all four provincial finalists were provincial winners were beaten in the quarterfinals like 2 weeks later. The same, I think, happened last year. There were all four, I'm not sure, no, it actually didn't happen last year, but a number of the provincial finalists bet the provincial winner. So minor can be up and down. It can often be based on form, and like Galway bet Derry in an All-Ireland semi-final last year was a unbelievable performance, and I'd say Derry had probably that bottled up and that little bit extra, I suppose, motivation in terms of having lost last year, having lost to Galway last year. And like you mentioned, when you lose one or two key players as well throughout the course of a season, it makes a big difference at that level. Sean Walsh is he's the physique of a senior player, and he was a big loss. And against the likes of Derry, who notoriously be physical teams up north at that level, he was a big loss. But from Alan's perspective, he'll take a lot from bringing these guys on, bottle up that taste of defeat and channel it positively going forward into their under 20s and senior careers, and also with their clubs later in the summer.
Yeah, Maurice, Eddie just mentions under 20s there. There's been 3 under 20s drafted into the senior panel, which include Sam O'Neill, Cillian O'Curran and Liam O'Connell. Last time you're on, you were calling for Cillian O'Curran to be called in. He has been, but those other two as well joined him in the senior panel.
Yeah, I think there might be one more as well, I think, but as I say, you're always guessing with this kind of stuff. But yeah, as I mentioned to you at the time, Paul, I just thought we played them in Comortas this year. I thought Cillian was at another level, and I thought he had a great year with the 20s. And just if you zone out on this slightly, I think there'll be an element of disappointment what happened last weekend, no doubt, and there'll be an element of disappointment what happened in Tuam against Sligo. But success, to my mind, that's a development grade. That's what your focus on that should be a development grade. So if we get 5 or 6 out of those teams to play senior football, that's a success. That's just as valuable as winning an underage title. So I think, in fairness to the current management, they've been very open doors with this type of stuff. They really are inviting in 20s, sometimes 20s that you wouldn't necessarily see it, and they throw them into the deep end. You go back to the league, the second round of the league last year, they were going up to Down to Newry to play away on Saturday night, and Liam Silk got sick in the bus, he had to cry off, and Johnny McGrath was dropped in front of back that day. And when you look at that was his debut, and he was dropped in, did a great job that day, and he is just accelerated from that moment on. So I think the pathway is pretty much there. The fact that there seems to be an open doors policy that we're rewarding for him there, I think is all encouraging. As you mentioned,
see any of these players getting game time?
What's that? Sorry.
Do you see any of these under 20s getting game time?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think it's too late in the year for that. There's a lot of players who, I think a lot of what we're seeing now, Paul, I would actually include Sean McCurran and Kieran Malloy in this conversation, to be honest. I think a lot of that is long-term stuff, is looking to a year down the line. I don't know how much I just think it's so tight. The way the calendar is this year, it is so tight. If Galway win this weekend, you're through to a quarter final. That's do or die for basically 3 weeks in a row after that. And I don't see the scope to take a vote there. Now, I wouldn't be totally and utterly balled over stunned if there was to pull a rabbit, but if you're asking me to call it, I wouldn't say so.
Maurice, you just had a piece on the AFL combine kind of trial up in Trinity College. There was obviously rumours and rumblings that there was Galway under-20s involved. From what I've heard so far from a source who was with the Galway under-20s this year, it looks like that it's Sam O'Neill, Conal Gallagher and Daniel O'Flaherty up there at the minute.
Yeah, Sam O'Neill was there. So these combine is it's kind of a catch-all phrase, but I would say these are a halfway house, these sessions, Paul. So for anyone who doesn't know, the AFL were coming to Ireland for years and they were running genuine combines, which was 20-metre testing, beep tests, agility testing. There was a kick in, so it was very, very refined, a lot of testing, a lot of vision taken. They'd send that over to, this was run by the AFL, by an independent party on behalf of the AFL, and they'd send all that stuff back over to Australia, and if clubs were interested, they'd invite somebody over. So that, for example, from a Galway perspective, that's how Killian McDade first made the move, that he was invited into this combine, tested remarkably well, like no surprise to anybody now who sees what an athlete he was, but he tested incredibly well, kicked on from that. These are not that. What's going on at the minute is that because of COVID, those combines were suspended. So these are kind of kicking sessions. My understanding is 90% of this was done with a Gaelic football. They only brought out the Aussie rules ball at the very end of it, but a lot of this is just about how lads are moving. I think there was 65 players in total, or something. A huge number of players were invited to this, and there's just kind of kicking sessions. So there's lads who were in the system before who tested at combines. Beyond those names you've mentioned, I'd say James McLaughlin is still on the radar if he can get back fit. He had the perfect profile for it, was involved in combines before, but just for whatever reason, has had a horrific run of injuries. Like, just your kind of heart would go out for him. I think Tom O'Connell was involved in these sessions before. All of these lads would still be in the system. Technically, if it got back up and running, this I think was a halfway house away for them to touch base. We saw a lot of this media was done in Australia. So from a Galway perspective, yeah, I would say those two in particular were still in the system. And then you're talking about some of the 20s. I think Sam O'Neill, Daniel Farty probably not necessarily in the same profile, but Sam O'Neill would be one who definitely does fit that profile. He is the way he's athletic. What they're looking for, they want kind of their version of halfbacks. So 6'2", good over their head. They can catch the ball, they can move, they're agile. Rest of that, then just kind of personality profiling and all that kind of stuff. So it's not like there's every chance of the group for the Aussies who were here for a couple of weeks. There's every chance of all the lads who went to that. None of them will ever go to Australia. No, not even for a trial. There's every chance, because this is not the full run thing yet. So I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be panicking if you're looking at this one with your Galway hat on and wondering, are we about to lose a bunch of players? I think it's unlikely, to be honest.
Yeah, no. As you said, a huge amount of players gone to that, so it'd be interesting to see.
I'll take good comfort from that from a St. Michael's perspective. No, Conal, I think personally has all the attributes for the compromise rules. Conal Gallagher, but if I was putting my St. Michael's hat on, I'd love to see him in a St. Michael's jersey. But like that, you just have to wish all the guys involved the best luck. At that age, it would be very, very exciting to be involved in that type of an environment, opportunities for players if they do pursue it. But hope we have Conal for the rest of the championship, anyways, from our perspective. And I'm sure Porrick Joyce. Yeah.
Eddie, obviously here to talk about Galway Armagh mainly in this All-Ireland series. Is carrick-on-shannon the right venue?
Personally, I don't believe it is. I understand the capacity is only about 12,009 or 12,000. Maurice might know better yourself, Paul, but I would have expected that
9. I think for health and safety reasons, they cut it to 9.
Yeah, and sure, like Galway would probably bring 9,000 themselves. I know, okay, it's not a knockout. The attendances have been down, but it's just disappointing that, like, okay, it's good for carrick-on-shannon and for the Leitrim and Connacht GAA. Okay, that's fine, but I do think it would have been better venues. I know they did call for Croke Park. I can understand why Croke Park might have, or I can understand why the GAA might have rejected that because it would have given them an extra game in Croke Park, which would have benefited both teams for later in the championship. But definitely there were better venues. Maybe Clonus or even Breffni Park might have been better ones. But again, maybe Galway wouldn't like to go that far. It's a fine line. But look, you would have hoped that the GAA would have made the call on it. I'd say personally, either club, either team, given the type of game it was and the fact that it's not overly relevant in the context, it's not knockout, they could have flicked for it and maybe played either in Pearse Stadium or the Athletic Grounds. It might have been a better option. But 9,000 in Carrick-on-Shannon, I'd expect there will be 9,000 there, and would be another 9 if the venue allowed.
The only thing with it yet, Maurice, I haven't heard anything that it's sold out yet or anything.
Yeah, I'm stunned by that. Like you're right, by the way, that I presumed that this. So to start with your first point, just I can appreciate why Croke Park wasn't used, but I would just stress for the last couple of years we were told Dublin can use Croke Park the same way anybody can nominate Croke Park, and now apparently that's not true. When both Galway and Armagh were submitted a request for this game to play in Croke Park. But look, maybe Eddie makes a valid point there about the competitive advantage they get from exposed to that with the view to later in the summer. So we'll park that for a second. And then, Paul, I think like the attendances across this, I think this new championship format, people are still getting their head around it, and maybe it hasn't captured the public the way we would necessarily hope. So as soon as this game was confirmed for Carrick-on-Shannon, I was convinced there's going to be a mad scramble and this will sell out in a day. And that wasn't the case. But look, I think it's very easy to come out and say it's all because of the style of football, it's all because of X, Y, and Z. The reality is this is a complicated situation. Like there's a cost of living crisis at the minute. There's a huge amount of games on top of each other. There's a lot of people who kind of are conscious of the fact that it's not do or die. So there's always, as long as there's always another day, you'll wait for another day. You know, that's in our tendency to put on the long finger. So there's a bunch of different stuff going on for why it might not have been picked up as well as it was. But all that said, I was still surprised that it didn't immediately sell out.
For Galway this weekend now against Armagh, they'll, as I was saying, it looks like they already have top spot. They really need a significant hammering here at the weekend to lose top spot and not go in as a top seed. But how do you think they'll look at this weekend now against Armagh?
Well, I'd be hoping myself personally, like you could say, okay, he'll use it as an opportunity to integrate in more players. Personally, I wouldn't. I think the integration of players should be done now. He should know his deck of cards. He should know his best 15. He should know his best 20, 22 players. If I was Pádraig Joyce, I'd be treating it seriously. I'd be going out to win. For the simple reason that most likely other teams will have another game before Galway actually will play a quarter final. So they could be sitting idle for 3 weeks. So this could be their last game before a quarter final, and could be, you don't want to be cold. And that's why I'd be treating it seriously. I'd be going out there. Okay, maybe rest one or two. That's fine. If there's niggles, not to force them, that's fine. But go with his best deck. That's what I'd be saying. For the simple reason, like I said, that Galway, if they most likely will top the group, irrespective of the result, they'll be sitting idle for a few weeks before playing a team that'll have 2 competitive games in the meantime. Obviously, the last group game and a preliminary quarter final in the meantime. That's how I'd be treating it from Pádraig Joyce's perspective, treating it like a preliminary quarter final, going out to win it with a 2-week or 3-week break to their quarter final, and it's knockout from there on in.
Really time to kind of issue a statement as well this weekend, Eddie, to the rest of the country.
I think so. Like, yeah, statement. I'm not so. Look, I'd say he will be going out. I think with the view to winning the game and putting on a performance. In terms of the statement, I'm not so sure. They need to put out a statement, but they do need to. They do need a good championship workout. I think they've been, by way of statement, like they got over Tyrone without overly exerting. Again, probably didn't really play to their potential for large parts of the game against Westmeath, but still kicked 20 points and kicked on in the latter phases, so showed their class in that regard. But yeah, statement, probably I'd say he'd like to keep the statement performances for maybe a bit later in the championship when it comes to knockout, but he'd definitely be looking for a better performance for the 70 minutes than he got in the last day out against Westmeath. And okay, the Tyrone game, conditions were difficult to play, to be fair. Hopefully we'll have, I know we're expecting showers this weekend, but it should be better conditions for football. But he'd be looking for a better, more consistent performance over the course of the 70 minutes, I'd say, and be looking for more for some of his key players as well, consistently over the 70 minutes.
Boris, what do you do from a defensive perspective this weekend? Keane Hernan played so well against Westmeath. Dylan McHugh's returned to training now.
I don't know if they're in competition, Paul. I watched back to Westmeath game during the week, and I read match reports and I wasn't sure, but Keane spent the majority of that game at fullback. Like Keane was marking John Heston.
Was that a surprise for you, for someone you see at club level?
It was, yeah, definitely. Keane is very good going forward. Now, look, I mean, who might say it still worked? He still got up and kicked 2 great points and drew a great dummy for a second point. So maybe it works. Sean Kelly was able to attack from the full back line as well. So, but Keane is just so good going forward that you would feel like you're kind of robbing is the wrong word, but limiting him slightly in that regard. And if you remember, like just going back to the league, he actually played well as a wing back option there too, and was great kick-off well too. I thought he played well against Armagh, ironically, when they met in the boxers. So, but yeah, I think Dylan McHugh comes back in. Dylan McHugh I think he's integral to this team. You just look at, like, to call him the assist king because he creates so much. Like, he's so good going forward. He's been an uber reliable player for Galway. I don't know if that's necessarily the breakdown. I could see scope for a change elsewhere. I still think there's absolutely a chance that Keane plays, but if it's in terms of does Dylan McHugh come back in, the answer is yes for me.
Who does he come back in for?
See, I think your traditional understanding of a full-back line is different now because, well, for a couple of reasons. A, because no team plays trio. It doesn't happen. There's nobody who leaves trio. So generally, it's not a traditional full-back man-to-man on the edge of the square. It's kind of a 2 versus 2 inside there. Like, you go back to the Connacht final now, for example. That was another one where you could see Jacqueline went to Niall Murphy and was just kind of following him wherever, really. So it might have been on the edge of the square, but it was more so it was a duel. It was about your matchup itself. So I wouldn't be surprised if both of them end up, if Sean Kelly and Keane Hernan both end up starting in the full back line, but maybe someone like Jacqueline as well. I think there's the scope to do that, and you could see Keane, John, and Keane McDade on your half back line too. I think there's scope for that as well, particularly when you consider. So the key matchups for this weekend, right? Somebody's going to have to go to Andrew Murnan. That has to happen. Now, do you sacrifice Sean Kelly to do that, which he's well able to do it? I think Keane Hernan is a great matchup for Andrew Hernan because he's good over his head. If you go back and watch the Tyrone Armagh game, Andrew Murnan ended up coming out to midfield and nearly changed the game. Like, some of the catches he had from kickouts there were phenomenal, and Keane can do that. Keane Hernan can absolutely do that job. I think he'd be a great matchup for him. On the flip side, then what are you going to do with Conor Turbot? I think Jack Glynn is a great matchup for him. Perfect. I would trust that all the time. Now, the caveat in all of this is what's going to happen with Rian O'Neill. It was finally confirmed, which again is just, I think it's a small bit laughable from an administration perspective that we only learned yesterday that they are going to appeal this suspension from, which happened over a week ago. But so depending on the circumstances, that Rian O'Neill changes everything. And if Rian O'Neill starts, I fully expect Sean Kelly to renew his deal with him. That's absolutely perfect. If he doesn't, there's scope there that if Rian O'Neill does not start, Armagh start worrying about what do we do with Sean Kelly versus right. If he does start, it's exactly what's going to happen. Sean Kelly's going to go to Rian O'Neill and they'll hit it to hair and skin fly for 70 minutes.
As well, Eddie, probably a decision to be made at midfield. Paul Conroy and Peter Cook started the last day. John Mayer left on the bench, but really made a huge impact against Westmeath and turned that game really around for Galway.
Yeah, again, it's just going back to both sides. Let's say the quarterfinal last year versus, let's say, preparing for the preliminary quarterfinal or a last group game this year. Like, both teams, I expected Armagh in the championship this year. I thought they'd kick on. They'd take a lot from the unfortunate defeat to Galway or the unlucky defeat. They haven't really. I think they've gone back a little bit now about Galway, like the depth that we have in our squad. Like, if Rian O'Neill doesn't play, I don't expect that'll be overturned. And I know, like Mara said, it's unusual and probably wrong that it's so late that it's coming to the appeal phase. But if they lose Rian O'Neill, I think it's Galway are going to win that game 99 out of 100 times, and that just shows how reliant they are on them. Galway, on the other hand, you're asking me the question, to go back to it, Peter Cook, John Maher, Paul Conroy in midfield. Like, that's a totally opposite to, let's say, Armagh, who are lying to the likes of Cian O'Neill. You could play any two of the three lads in midfield, let's say Peter Cook, John Maher and Paul Conroy, and they'd probably put it up to any midfield pairing in the country. It's a really good way to it's a really, really good place we're at. It's somewhere we probably didn't have the depth last year. Same with Keane Hernan. A lot of managers would love to have that headache of where do we put Keane Hernan, an outstanding footballer and a really up-and-coming star with loads of attributes, who can play in defence, like Maurice said, or in the attack. It just shows in terms of where the team is going. Midfield, I think Peter Cook's best position is midfield. Personally, I think he had a really, really good game last week against Westmeath. I think his performances have sort of steadily improved throughout the course of the league, and sort of found his way back into county and up to that standard which we know he has. So I think he'll probably stick with Peter Cook and Paul Conroy next weekend. But in terms of John Maher, he's a massive player to have to come off the bench. Last year, like, John Maher might be a guy that he's looking at in terms of Croke Park in the later phases of the championship. It's a big pitch. He has the physique and the engine, but he has that option now to maybe look at integrating maybe John Maher back into the starting lineup, be it from Croke Park, and then have the likes of Paul Conroy to come back in and finish out a game strong. Again, I don't know what Pádraig's thought process is, but it's a good headache to have three players like Peter Cook, really good kick passer, can score. Paul Conroy, we all know what Paul has to offer. He's done it year in, year out since making his debut in 2008 with Liam Salmon. And John Maher offers a different dynamic, a real workhorse, physical attributes, really fit up and down the pitch, and has added a score to his game as well, which he mightn't have had in the years gone by. So that's again testament to Cian O'Neill and his backroom staff, Pádraig's backroom staff, in terms of the skill levels have improved. So yeah, if going back to your question, I know I went on, but I think he'll stick with Peter Cook and Paul Conroy for this game, but that might change later in the championship.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, Maurice, because there's probably a couple of injury concerns in attack as well. Robert Finnerty obviously going off injured against Westmeath, Shane Walsh holding the hamstring, and then Tom O'Callaghan looked like he picked up an injury as well. So you're maybe thinking, if a couple of them are doubts at all, that you could see one of those midfield options go into the half-forward line.
Yeah, I kind of anticipate that to a certain extent. I think, given Robert Finnerty struggled with his ankle previously, there's every chance that you could see Peter go back in at wing forward. The other thing as well is that if Creeley and McPartland start in midfield, as you would expect for Armagh, Maher and Cook are good matchups for the two of them. They're two kind of old school traditional Mr. Gadget arm midfielders who get their paw into everything and will field for kickouts and run all day. Whereas if that does happen, that means that Kieran Mackin and Jalio Burns are on each wing for Armagh. And like, they're probably two of the most athletic wing backs in the country, up there with these hole punching halfbacks, the likes of like Gavin White, Jack McCaffrey, Paddy Durkin, these guys who just come from deep. And if that is the case, I think Cook and Tierney are good matchups for both of them. And Tierney and Jalio Burns, I don't think you'd have too much concerns about that. And similarly, Cook and Kieran Mackin would have a go at it at the other side. So I think that would suit from the perspective of this game. You'd have no major concerns if it ends up being that. Those injury concerns are valid. On the flip side, then, from an Armagh perspective, James Morgan did a great job on Shane Walsh last year, but he's not around this year. So what did they send Aidan Forker after him? What did they do with Damien Comer? I think that's a real headache for this game. I don't know I just don't see a match that who'd come out and that likely. Their two best man markers for me are James Morgan and Barry Cambridge, and they're dogged by injury trouble this year. So they'd have similar concerns, particularly at that end of the field. And from a goal perspective, I definitely think that I think the way John Maher came on and started claiming kickouts and stuff, I could really see him gaining supremacy if it's McPartland and Creeley.
Yeah, Galway just probably want to tidy up those injuries. You could see. Do you see anyone then breaking into getting a chance in the inside line if they have a Robert Finnerty? I'm not sure what the situation on Shane is either.
It's a difficult one, because a lot of the options Galway have developed are kind of fluid players. Like, you go back to Carl Sweeney, I just think it was a remarkable thing that Carl Sweeney filled in where he did against Tyrone, given the tendency he's shown this year. And I think that'll stand to him. But then at the same time, of the lads, like Dessie Kennedy is featured on the bench very prominently this year. I think not having Patrick Kelly is kind of a really killer blow, because you don't have the same punch in terms of going forward. So Tom McLennan, as you mentioned, came on and came back off against Westmeath. And I still think there's a bit more kind of certainty around what they would like to see happen there in terms of Ian Burke, Damon Coleman and Shane Walsh, if they're all fit. And I don't see a huge amount of scope for experimentation for this either. I thought Paul Joyce was really interesting talking after the Westmeath game about how unhappy is the wrong word, but he hasn't been satisfied with a performance yet. Like the first thing he flagged after the Roscommon game was that spell when they rattled off 1-3 and gouged very much the rest of it back. The Sligo game was a bit of a non-contest. He was frustrated they didn't put the foot down against Tyrone when they were down to 13 players, and the similar thing against Westmeath kind of fits in start. So I could fully see how he might love the idea of flatten the mat, go hard at this mat and get a great performance, and they absolutely bounce into the All-Ireland quarterfinals, and suddenly they're a team that nobody wants to play.
And like Eddie, you're just touching on Armagh earlier. They probably went back a bit from their style this year. Like that quarterfinal game, there was really an attacking mindset with Armagh, but they definitely seem to want to be a bit more defensively solid this year.
Yeah, I'd say it's evident in their games, but then sometimes I find with Armagh, then when games are starting to go away from them and they actually push up and go man, they great, like, you know, they're able to do it. And I think it was at the Tyrone game, you could clearly see evidence of that. When they pushed up, they were actually more the capable and a lot more competitive. So it's an over analysis by Kieran McGeeney in terms of the whole structures and the trying to protect the defence, because like Charlie O'Byrne and Mackin and wing back, like they're probably the two, like that style and that physique of wing backs. I know ourselves with McDade and McHugh were outstanding as well, but that style and physique, they're standout players, and you want those guys letting the shackles off and getting up the pitch, getting scores, and having the autonomy to do that. But McGeeney doesn't seem to be giving them that this year. It's more, like I said, I would have expected Armagh to kick on and taken a lot from last year, but they've actually gone the opposite. I think they've gone back a little bit, and I've been disappointed with their progress. I thought they would have been a good shout for Ulster. They didn't progress in Ulster, and have been petering through the group phase and lucky to beat Westmeath. But again, there might be a big performance in them on Sunday. But I'd like to see an Armagh team at McGeeney really pushing up, going all out, and realising the actual potential they have in their team, rather than that sort of fallback of protecting what we have. Because the likes of Galway, you mentioned Shane Walsh, Damien Comer, like they just roll off your tongue, the players at our disposal in terms of scoring forwards. They'll pick off a team that sits back. Peter Cook and can kick scores from 40 yards. Paul Conroy. We've loads of players that can kick from range, and it'll just draw out the blanket and ultimately force Armagh to push up. So you'd like to think from their perspective, I think they get more out of themselves when they do push up. Look, McGeeney would know a lot more than me. He obviously over them one of the most longest serving managers, bar Colm Collins, I think, in the inter-county scene. So he knows the team well, but I do think he'd get more, from my evidence of watching them, they get more out of themselves and they push up and go at a team.
How would you handle Ethan Rafferty as a forward, Eddie?
As a forward, yeah, he's very difficult. I hate keepers coming out, because some coaches will tell you leave a keeper, but he's like, historically a goalkeeper wouldn't be you'd leave him on the ball, because they generally weren't overly comfortable. The new style of goalkeepers, they're very, very comfortable and well able. How would I manage him? Generally, sort of, you'd find you'd leave him go and try and sort of get. I remember before with Michaels, Manus was always difficult to manage. He'd be coming up the pitch, and he's inspirational for Spittle. And if you get a turnover on a goalkeeper, it's a great lift. So how we used to manage him, like more or less like. Well, I shouldn't be saying we might get them on Monday night in the draw, but you just let the keeper up and maybe channel him down a channel there, and then have a man behind him to ultimately turn him over, because like I said, turning over a goalkeeper really gives the players and it gives the crowd a great lift, because traditional GAA viewers, spectators, like I see my dad, he'd always be saying, what's the goalkeeper coming out? Because his idea of a goalkeeper is inside his 6-yard box. So I think it gives the crowd a great lift when you turn them over. But he's a serious player, and begging, and like they've really transformed the role of a goalkeeper. But I've been kind to leave them up the pitch and then try and run them into a dead alley as such, or a sewer, like Kevin Walsh, you said, narrow off the channel and then literally block them off into a cul-de-sac. That's how I'd sort of manage them, leave them free rein. That's personally, but Maurice might have a different view on managing keepers.
Is there anything different, Maurice, you expect to see with Armagh this weekend?
I wouldn't be one bit surprised if Ross McQuillan starts. I think he has had a huge impact when he's come on. I kind of don't understand why he hasn't started more. He's an electric pace. He must be one of the fastest players in the country. Like another guy actually went to the AFL and came back. Would have been friendly with Kenny McDade over there. He is rapid, quick. And I think if you started a half forward line with Jason Duffy on one wing and Ross McQuillan on the other wing, it would put fear into it. And as Eddie mentioned, you've got those two boys on either wing then in terms of Mackin and Eddie Burns. They've just got savage runners all over the field. They put real fear into every. And then depending on, for the purposes of this, I'd say I don't think Reid O'Neill will get his suspension. I don't think he should either. I think it was an obvious red card, and some of the stuff that's come on after it's kind of laughable, to be honest. So I think Mernon will start in for forward, and then you could see I'd start Stefan Campbell if I was from a perspective. I think you could easily play him as 11, and he could, especially when John Daly's dropping off. Like Stephen Campbell is a shooter from range, that he could actually take advantage of that as well. Now, so that means you're leaving out Rory Brugan. The way that I've broken this down, I would still start Turbot as well, obviously. But I think they'd have a really fine balance to their forward line. And I think Ross McQuillan is a guy who hasn't captured the public yet, but will. I think he could carry huge trash coming forward. And then the other one is what they do at the other end of the field. I don't know if, as I say, we don't know if James Morgan and McCambridge are going to feature. I presume they won't, because it's pretty late, which means that you're looking at McKay and Faulkner as their two designated man markers. So I suppose McKay goes to Comer and Faulkner goes to Shane Walsh. I think Galway have the edge there. Maybe that's famous last words, but I do think that Galway could get on top of that. And I think the natural consequences, I think Armagh might see that Galway have the edge there, and you could see them revert back to what we've seen lately, which is trying to get them a lot of help. Starting slow, as Eddie mentioned, suddenly they find themselves down, they push up, they look great, come back and just fall short at the end. But I do hope, Paul, there's when you look at the two teams on paper, there's absolutely potential for this to be an absolute cracker this weekend. Like, this should be a blockbuster game. And I think the championship needs it, to be honest. It hasn't really ignited the way we would like it. And given how dramatic this final day could be, given how much, if Armagh were to win this game, what that would do for their season, really kind of a huge lift, them kind of powering on and over the hump of, it looks like they stayed a small bit after the emotional investment that came with the Ulster final. That would be a huge lift for them. So I hope we get an absolute cracker. And from that perspective, I hope Armagh going to start front foot, trust that, but there will be 6 very talented forwards. They can do the work the other way too. I mean, I don't need to say that Jason Duffy obviously is well capable of that, and McQuillan too. So I think there'll be a really good balance in a team like that.
Eddie, is that where Galway hold the advantage, where Armagh ultimately don't have the man makers to take some of Galway's key men out of this game?
Yeah, like Maurice had mentioned, some key defenders are out for Armagh, and Shane was fairly well curtailed in the quarterfinal last year. And just your point, what was the query again? Your question?
Is it just where Galway hold the advantage, maybe having the man makers to deal with some of Armagh's key men, but maybe Armagh don't have the man makers to deal with some of Galway's key men?
Yeah, no, I think that is like you said, the two key players, two key defenders, Morgan and is out for Armagh the next day. Yeah, Galway have the depth, to be honest. Like, they have, I think, more depth. They have more versatility. They have forwards that can play in defence. They've, like Sean Kelly, have the luxury of dropping in Ian Hernan to do a job, and just have a little bit more resources at their disposal. Maybe I was being a little bit harsh on Armagh. Like, they did progress well in Ulster, and were probably very, very unlucky to lose on penalties in the Ulster final. But I just feel they've petered away a little bit in the All-Ireland series, and I would have expected a little bit more of them. That said, losing penalties can take a lot out of a team mentally, and it obviously did, and they were slow to start the championship. So maybe a little bit been a bit harsh on them in my earlier contribution, but definitely I think in terms of winning and losing on Sunday, I think Galway have rightly favourites. I expect them to win. They have more depth in their squad. Rian O'Neill, like Maurice said, I don't expect his card to be overturned. It shouldn't be. If the letter of the law has been adhered to, and he's a massive loss. If Rian O'Neill was involved, I think it's a whole different conversation. It's a much tighter game. Páirc Joyce has a few extra headaches to consider. Sean Kelly is probably taken out to man mark him. Instead, he's most likely going to have more of a free role, to have more of an influence on Galway's attacking style. So yeah, no, I'd expect a Galway win. We have that bit more depth. Armagh probably will be looking for a better performance themselves, but be disappointed, and Páirc Joyce would too, I'd say, if Galway didn't come out on top on Sunday.
Yeah, that game taking place at 4 o'clock, carrick-on-shannon on Sunday, and the game live on RTE as well. That's all we have time for on our show for today. Thanks a million to the lads for coming on.
The Backdoor GAA Podcast for 2023 is now brought to you by Steede Motor Group. For your personalised vehicle shopping experience, visit steedemotorgroup.ie. We are now delighted to announce our second sponsor of the podcast. Harper Finlay are a professional service recruitment company operating nationwide and are dedicated to helping people find their dream job.